There are so many tours you could take at the Vatican. How do you know which one to book? You may decide to visit on your own, as many people do. But if you're someone who likes to be guided, who wants to know what you're looking at, or perhaps who wants a more special experience, here are my picks for the top 5 tours to take at the Vatican. I've lived in Rome since 2001. I've taken hundreds of tours of the Vatican Museums, St. Peter's Basilica. I visited on my own. I visited everywhere you can imagine. And since I've been living here and visiting the Vatican has changed its offerings somewhat. So on today's video, I am giving you my updated version of the 5 best tours to take at the Vatican, at least in my experience. First, to be clear, there are 2 main sites to visit in Vatican City. The Vatican Museums contains one of the world's largest collections of art. It also contains entire rooms that are works of art in and of themselves. All tours of the Vatican Museums include the Sistine Chapel, many of them ending there. St. Peter's Basilica is one of the world's largest churches by many standards. It's a mostly Renaissance and Baroque church built over many centuries, starting in the 1500s by some of the most famous and important artists and architects in the world, including Raphael, Michelangelo, and Gian Lorenzo Bernini. For more about the history of Vatican City, don't miss my ebook, which I've linked to in the description below. The Vatican Museums and St. Peter's Basilica are both inside of Vatican City, but they are completely unrelated to each other and they are managed by separate entities. I'm standing here in St. Peter's Square. This is St. Peter's Basilica, and just to the right of the Basilica, you can see a sort of pointy tip. That is the roof of the Sistine Chapel. Off to the right of St. Peter's Basilica is the Apostolic Palace. So as you can see, the Sistine Chapel is right next to St. Peter's Basilica. However, it is inside of the Vatican Museums and unrelated to St. Peter's Basilica. So, a visit to Vatican City can include visiting the Vatican Museums and the Sistine Chapel and not St. Peter's Basilica, or it can include visiting St. Peter's Basilica and not the museums and the Sistine Chapel, or you can visit them both. For those of you who have more than the typical 2 to 3 days here in Rome, I do suggest separating these visits out and visiting St. Peter's Basilica on its own one day and visiting the museums and the Sistine Chapel on its own a separate day. But I know that many of you come to Rome for 2 to 3 to 4 days. You don't have that much time. You want to visit Vatican City and you want to see the most possible on your trip. And sometimes you want to see the museums and the Basilica on the same visit. The tours I'm about to go over cover all of these options. I'll explain the pros and cons of each. And after I list my 5 favorite tours at the Vatican, I'm going to explain what to do if you cannot or do not want to take one of these tours, how to pick the best tour for you. And by the way, both of these entities, the Vatican Museums and St. Peter's Basilica, have audio guides, so if you're not a tour person, you can do that too. But since this video is about the top tours to take at the Vatican, we're going to focus on that. Let's start with the Vatican Museums and the Sistine Chapel. I'll start off by saying that the Vatican Museums does offer its own tours. These are not in my top 5 favorite tours at the Vatican, but let me tell you a little bit about them. If you want to take a tour of the Vatican Museums through the Vatican Museums, you can and must book it on the official Vatican Museums website, which I'm linking to in the description below. These are group tours. It's pretty easy to book these tours. You can usually find availability, and it is your least expensive option for taking a tour of the Vatican Museums. This tour finishes inside of the Sistine Chapel, and at the end of the tour, if you want, you can go back to the beginning of the Vatican Museums, don't exit, and then you can make your way back through the museums again a second time at your own pace. The thing about the tours you can take through the Vatican Museums is that you don't know who you're going to get as a guide. I've taken many tours through the Vatican Museums, and I've had some of the best guides I've ever had when I've booked through the Vatican Museums. And I'm sorry to say, but I've also had some pretty bad guides when I've taken tours through the Vatican Museums. Believe it or not, they can give incorrect information. They can be sort of blasé and unenthusiastic, which takes a lot away from your experience, in my opinion. But as I said, I've also had some wonderful guides when I've taken tours through the Vatican Museums. So if this is the tour you want to book, just give it a try and hope for the best. Another thing about the tour of the Vatican Museums that I don't really love is that the tour size is capped at 25 people. But 25 people is actually quite a lot, even if you're using those whisper headphones. One other thing about the tours that you book through the Vatican Museums, there is no way to take the shortcut into St. Peter's Basilica on one of these tours. What do I mean by the shortcut? As I explained earlier, the Vatican Museums is a separate entity from St. Peter's Basilica. But also, as I showed you earlier, the Sistine Chapel is really close to St. Peter's Basilica. There is technically a way to get between the two. There is no way whatsoever as a tourist that you can go from St. Peter's Basilica into the Sistine Chapel. However, it is possible to go from the Sistine Chapel into St. Peter's Basilica using this shortcut. The shortcut consists of two staircases. The first takes you from the Sistine Chapel out into the Apostolic Palace, and the second staircase, built by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, takes you down through the bronze door where the Swiss Guards stand. You leave the bronze door and you are right at the entrance of St. Peter's Basilica, past all of the security lines. The security lines to get into St. Peter's Basilica are what takes so long, what causes people to have to wait a long time to get into the church, even though it is free. Yes, St. Peter's Basilica is free to visit for everyone, but you can reserve a spot if you want to. This is a relatively new booking system. I've done a recent video about it, so you can check that out for more details. But most people show up here in St. Peter's Square, hoping to go inside of St. Peter's Basilica, and they encounter these really long lines. And the lines are to go through security. There are ways to find shorter lines, like coming in low season or coming at 7 a.m. when the Basilica opens. And one of the ways you can skip that security line is, as I just told you, taking the shortcut from the Sistine Chapel into St. Peter's Basilica. And the reason that you can skip that line in theory is because you have already gone through security to enter the Vatican Museums. So, since you can't take the shortcut when you book a tour through the Vatican Museums, how can you take that shortcut? The only way you can take the shortcut from the Vatican Museums, from the Sistine Chapel into St. Peter's Basilica, is when you book this tour through an outside tour company. An outside tour company is basically giving you a tour of two sites, the Vatican Museums and St. Peter's Basilica. And they get permission from the Vatican to use that shortcut. The Vatican Museums themselves simply do not have access to that shortcut because it's inside of the Apostolic Palace, which is not part of the Vatican Museums. At the time I'm making this video for you, something has recently changed here at the Vatican where this shortcut is concerned. Since I've lived here, that shortcut has undergone many different changes and rules. Years ago, we used to just be able to go inside of the Vatican Museums, inside of the Sistine Chapel, and kind of sneak in behind some of the many tour groups that were using that shortcut. It was a little bit uncontrolled, and we used to just be able to kind of snake our way in, and it was pretty easy. Then they cracked down on it. They got really strict, and the only way you could go through was on a tour. Then COVID happened and the shortcut closed, and then it opened back up again, and it was kind of sort of available to everyone, and now it's back to being only available to people on a guided tour. And here's the new thing. It's not just that the shortcut is only available to outside tour operators. The tour operator must be an official registered tour operator with the Basilica. And as I said, at the time I'm making this video, there is a brand new rule. Any tour operator that wants to use the shortcut must book it in advance, and they have to pay a small fee for this. So not only was it strict before, it's gotten even more strict and a little bit more complicated. And what I think this means right now is that some tour operators are just simply going to opt not to use the shortcut. But if you want to use the shortcut, it is indeed available. And tour operators who are registered with the Basilica and organize this in advance are using the shortcut. It is not closed. It is open, but it's limited. First, remember that the shortcut will always be closed when the Basilica is inaccessible, such as during the papal audience. If you do want to take that shortcut and you book a tour that does indeed include the shortcut, make sure not to book it on a day that the Basilica is closed. If you're not sure, you can ask the tour company. So this leads me to my number one favorite tour here at the Vatican, which is the Pristine Sistine with Walks of Italy. Walks of Italy is indeed an official tour operator with the Basilica, and they do have access to the shortcut, and they are using it. I did a whole video about this tour, specifically the early morning version of the tour, because they do have a late afternoon version of the Pristine Sistine, but that tour does not include the Basilica. So watch that video if you want to see what it's like, if you want to see what it's like to take the shortcut, but suffice to say that the tour is fantastic. It's a very small group, fewer than 15 people. Walks of Italy has excellent guides. I also love the Pristine Sistine because you get a really early start on your day, and then you have the other half of the day to do other things. In my opinion, there is one small downside of taking this tour, and that is if you're the type of person who wants to take a tour to get the highlights and then stay in the museums, go back on your own and spend more time, this tour does not allow you to do that. It's a very complete tour. You're going to get about 2.5 hours in the museums, about an hour or so in the Basilica, but once you leave the Sistine Chapel, you have left the Vatican Museums and you cannot go back in on the same ticket. But I really do think that after 2.5 hours in the museums, you will have seen quite a lot. And I honestly believe that this is the best tour of the Vatican for the money. My next favorite tour of the Vatican Museums is the Keymaster Tour. I've also done a video for you about the Keymaster Tour, so you can check that out. It is an amazing tour. The Keymaster Tour is what it sounds like. You go around with the museum's Keymaster and open up the Vatican Museums. This is a truly wow type of experience. Everybody gets a chance to open some door, turn on some lights, open some windows, etc. The tours are max 20 people, and your group is the only group inside of the Vatican Museum, so it is a truly exclusive experience. At the end of this tour, somebody is going to be able to open the Sistine Chapel with the key. You go inside the Sistine Chapel when it's dark, and you are watching them turn on the lights. It is truly a special experience. I've done this tour on a few occasions, and I was able to take photo and video, but it's not necessarily going to be allowed, so do not count on this if you book this tour. Sometimes on these kind of tours they allow it and sometimes they don't. I'm not sure what the criteria are, but as I said, don't count on it. Just go and enjoy the experience. And at the end of the tour, once you leave the Sistine Chapel, you can go back to the beginning of the Vatican Museums and explore at your own pace if you want to. Here are the downsides of taking the Keymaster Tour. First of all, it is expensive. Although if you can afford it, I think for such a once-in-a-lifetime experience, it is worth it. Second of all, it's not available daily, so you have to see if it fits in with your schedule. In the description below, I'm linking to the Walks of Italy website where you can check the availability for this tour. Another thing about this tour that may not work for you is that you cannot take the shortcut into St. Peter's Basilica. The reason being that the shortcut opens at 9:30 and your tour inside the Sistine Chapel finishes before the museums open at 8 o'clock. Fourth, the tour is really early, so it can be pretty painful to get up at 4:30 in the morning, but again, I think that it is worth it. And the last thing that may not work for you is that this is not a tour per se. You're not really going to get a lot of background on the architecture, the history, the art, etc. It is really more about that experience, the amazing feeling of going through the museums and opening them up. But if your time and budget allows for it, you could take this tour and then take a Vatican Museums tour separately during the day. Or, as I said, you can go back to the beginning of the museums and explore on your own at your own pace, perhaps picking up the audio guide. This brings us to my next favorite tour of the Vatican Museums, and that is the tour called Alone in the Vatican. I did a video for you about this tour that I took with Live Tours, and it was absolutely phenomenal. This is another super early tour, although you can also take this tour after hours. The tour goes slightly later than the Keymaster, so the museums are already open, at least for the staff, and the lights are on, but the museums are not open yet to the general public. Some time ago, they used to have these pre-opening tours of the Vatican Museums. They were really affordable, and a lot of tour companies offered them. This is not the case anymore. Now, if you want to take a pre-opening tour of the Vatican Museums, or as I said, after closing, you can take this Alone in the Vatican tour, but it's really exclusive. Only one tour operator can do this at a time. Like the Keymaster, your 20-person max group is going to be the only group inside of the Vatican Museums. And likewise, you'll be the only people inside the Sistine Chapel. Also, like the Keymaster, I cannot guarantee they will allow you to take photos. Don't count on it. Just go and enjoy the experience. One of the best things about this tour is that it is a true tour. You are going to have a guide that is taking you through the museums, giving you all the history, background, showing you the art, talking about it. So unlike the Keymaster, which is really more about the experience, here you are in the Vatican alone with your guide and your other people on your tour, and you're getting a true tour without any noise, distractions, people crowding you, etc. Like the Keymaster, this tour finishes inside of the Sistine Chapel. They cannot take the shortcut because, again, you end in the Sistine Chapel before the Vatican Museums open at 8 a.m. So some of the cons of this tour, some of the things that may not be ideal for you are it's super early, it's pretty expensive, it's not always available every day, and you cannot take the shortcut. The big comparison between this tour and the Keymaster tour is that the Keymaster tour has that really special feeling of opening the museums, being in dark rooms and watching the lights come on, opening doors, etc. But this tour is a true tour, and you really do get an amazing experience inside of the museums because you're getting a real tour. Don't get me wrong, it's not that the Keymaster offers zero tour. There is a little bit of tour in there. They do explain some of it, but it's definitely not as much of a real tour as this Alone in the Vatican. All right, now we're leaving the Vatican Museums, coming over here to St. Peter's Basilica. My next favorite tour is called St. Peter's Basilica, top to bottom, with dome climb and crypt. As I have explained, it is free to enter St. Peter's Basilica. You can come here on your own. You can also book the audio guide, as I talked about in another video. And you can pay to climb the dome if you want to. You can do this in advance or even on site. And once you're inside of the Basilica, you can also visit the Crypt, which is where many popes are buried. The Crypt is part of the Basilica, and it is free to visit. But I do love this tour because it gives you a true tour of the Basilica. This is the largest church in the world by many standards, and there is so much history here. And I think having somebody to take you into the Basilica, give you the history, point out special things that you should notice, accompany you to the dome climb and to the crypt is a special way to visit this church. While you can visit the church for free, as I mentioned, I think this tour is a great value for the money. And I honestly cannot think of any downside of this tour. And once the tour is finished, you can simply stay inside the Basilica if you like. My last and fifth favorite tour to take here at the Vatican is also inside of the Basilica, but it is underneath it. I'm talking, of course, about a visit to St. Peter's tomb. The crypt that I spoke of earlier that's inside of St. Peter's Basilica that you can easily access from the Basilica is not the same thing as St. Peter's tomb. The crypt, or Vatican grottos as they're called, is right above St. Peter's tomb and easily accessible. It simply happens to be where many popes are buried because they wanted to be near St. Peter the Apostle. The reason that this church is where it is and the reason that it's called St. Peter's Basilica is because St. Peter is thought to be buried right underneath the dome. The only way to book this tour is to request it through the official website, which I'm linking to in the description below. I say to request it because it's not guaranteed you'll get a spot. They let about 200 people in a day, 12 people at a time on a given tour, so it is limited. But if you can do it, I highly recommend it. I think it is an amazing tour. I don't have any pictures and video to share with you. Pictures and video are strictly forbidden inside of St. Peter's tomb. The tour is really amazing because most of the tour is actually an archaeological tour. It's only at the very end that you get to see where St. Peter is buried. A huge benefit of booking this tour of St. Peter's tomb is at the very end of it, you wind up inside of St. Peter's Basilica because you will have already gone through security at the Swiss Guard gate to get into the tour. There are probably two downsides to this tour. Number one, it can be very hard to get. And number two, it can be claustrophobic. For all tours at the Vatican, guys, please remember proper dress is required. You've got to have covered knees, covered shoulders, covered midriffs, etc. This is true for everyone of all ages. I know many of you write me and say, oh, my teenage boys do not want to have to wear pants in the summer. I get it. I'm not a Vatican guard. I'm just telling you what the rules are. You can try it. You can come down here with shorts that come to your knees if you want. You can risk it. It's up to you. So what happens if you cannot take one of the tours that I recommended in this video, or you do not want to take one of them? For the Vatican Museums, I know that the Keymaster and Alone in the Vatican, they're really expensive. And Taking the Pristine Sistine may not work for you for a variety of reasons. So here's what you should do. Many people ask me if sites like Tickets, Get Your Guide, Viator are legit. Yes, they are. These sites are a lot like Booking.com or TripAdvisor. They are not specific tour companies, but rather portals that allow you to comparison shop for tours. They all have their own help desk or support staff, so you have somebody to ask if you have questions or problems. Let's take Get Your Guide, for example. If you type in to Get Your Guide Vatican Museums or Vatican or St. Peter's Basilica or whatever, you're going to see a huge selection of tours on offer. One thing that I like about this is that you can filter it. You can put in your dates, you can put in a budget, you can put in time of day, group size, etc. Then, once you've selected a tour that seems to fit what you're looking for, you can study carefully what is included and what is not included. You can also see who the tour operator is if you look carefully. Now, if you are looking for that shortcut, you're going to find fewer options now because, as I explained, it's become a little bit more difficult and a lot of the tour companies either cannot or just will not be offering this. But if you see it offered, make sure that after you receive your confirmation, you write back and double check that the shortcut is definitely offered. And don't forget to check the cancellation policy when you book. One question I get a lot is, will your tour be canceled, or is there a high probability that your tour will be canceled if you book through a third party? Well, with the Colosseum, this does happen because where the Colosseum is concerned, there is actually a limit to the number of people who can enter on a given day. Here at the Vatican Museums, they actually don't put a cap on it. More than 30,000 people a day visit the Vatican Museums. What's happening with the Colosseum is that there are a lot of tickets that people want to book. They're in extremely high demand and really short supply. These are the tickets to the underground and the attico or attic of the Colosseum. Tour companies are offering these for dates that are way past the current date, which means they don't have the tickets yet. They're selling you a future. And since it is literally impossible for everybody who wants to take these high demand tours to get a ticket for them, it's inevitable that some of these companies that are offering these tickets and tours way in advance are going to have to cancel on some of you. But that's the topic of another video, and this issue is not the case here at the Vatican. If you book a tour of the Vatican Museums, you're going to get a tour of the Vatican Museums. What could happen is that the time could change on you. Let's say that Get Your Guide tries to book you with the tour company that you booked, but that tour company is getting overbookings. Maybe they got some extra bookings directly or through another of these portals and they wind up overbooked. And so Get Your Guide will simply make sure to fulfill your request by booking you with another of their tour companies. And if that happens, what you booked might change. For example, the time could change, or even the option for taking the shortcut. I'm not telling you not to use these portals because I think that they're really useful for being able to comparison shop and find lots of options and see them side by side. And truly, most of the time when you book through these portals, you're gonna get exactly the tour you booked and it's gonna go just fine. Once in a while, you'll hear these stories about somebody's tour who got moved or changed or something like this, and it could happen to you. But this is not the norm. So I hope you'll try one of my top 5 favorite tours here at the Vatican. And if not, I hope that you'll use one of these portals to fine-tune your search and get the tour that works for you. So what do you guys think? Have you tried these tours? Have you heard of these tours? Do you think you're gonna wanna book one of these tours? Drop me a line in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer you. Now, if you want to see my secret best way to visit the Vatican Museums on your own, don't miss my video right here.